So this webinar should take about 15 minutes, and then we'll have questions to answer on chat. So we'll get started. Thanks everybody for joining. I'm Tom Diamond, President with RS Metrics. Just 30 seconds on the company. We're the first company to do quantitative analysis of satellite imagery for businesses and investors. I've started back in 2010. You may be familiar with, measuring cars in Walmart parking lots, and that's what we do. And in the last few years, there's been more satellite imagery available, and it's made possible other products that were not possible before, because now we have higher frequency of imagery and can see trends all over the world. And that's just going to grow and get easier and faster and cheaper for everybody going forward. RS Metrics has been around for a long time, been featured in a lot of different articles and thought leadership, and hundreds of customers across a lot of different sectors and industries. So really pretty experienced in the area. And today what we're talking about is metals, which really, even if you don't directly trade metal futures price, you'll see in these slides that there is a lot of other applications for this metals data. The overall industry, global metals supply is obviously very important to many economies and businesses, but there is not much data available. And any data that is available is usually reported much later after the metal has been produced, when it's sitting in the exchanges or when governments come around to putting a report together. Fundamental investors and analysts who are very deep in this industry, one of the main things they're trying to do is track physical flows of metal from one place to another. And quants and systematic traders are looking for supply data in metals and other areas and other commodities to help improve performance of forecast models. And as I said, it's for directly trading metals, but other things as well, like equities, currencies, and interest rates. And you can kind of view the entire metals industry globally as sort of an iceberg, where at the top above the water is what is visible, and that's the inventory and what's listed on LME and CME and the other exchanges. And below that, under the water, is all the off-warrant inventories sitting at a smelter in Russia or in the middle of a desert somewhere that is not reported. And it takes months for that to really get above the water. So what MetalSignals is a survey using satellite imagery, and it covers about 400 global locations right now across aluminum, copper, zinc, and iron ore. And we are currently adding more locations for bauxite, coal, and steel this year. And what you can see on the screen is an example of an aluminum storage yard. And this is representative of the type of image that we're using and the data that we're collecting. The data set itself is about 5 years of historical data. So for most locations back to about 2013. And as I said, it's about 400 locations today. Each location is imaged by satellites, depending on where it is in the world, anywhere from every couple of days to maybe about every 3 to 4 weeks. And that's because we work with all the satellite companies that are available today, and they're picking up images for themselves and governments and other customers, and we're piggybacking on that. So a lot of the imagery is in Eastern China and the US, where there's a lot of interest. But in addition, we also task or program satellites to pick up these locations. And later this year, there already has been a big increase in the number of optical satellites, high-resolution satellites that are available. And we will be able to get pretty much weekly or even near daily images of most of these locations later this year, which will allow us to really have even more frequent forecasts and updates with this data. The data set itself is available in a daily data feed. So any new imagery that's collected and processed and turned into data is put on FTP or delivered through CME data mine within about 48 hours of when the image was actually collected by the satellite. So it's fairly real time comparatively. The production flow for MetalSignals, like all of RS Metrics products, falls into 3 main areas. There's monitoring, first of all, measuring once we have images and we've monitored, and then predicting. So we're not only taking pictures and measuring what's in those pictures, we also have white papers and demo models and applications that actually show you how to predict and use this to generate alpha and forecast price and inventories and other metrics. So first, with monitoring, MetalSignals is based entirely on high-resolution imaging satellites. As I said, that's growing very quickly. We also use airplanes for some other products, not so much for metals. It's not possible to use airplanes all over the world quite yet. But the point being here is that from a compliance and legal perspective, there are no issues at all. We've been through compliance and legal at hundreds of hedge funds and corporates over the years and have never been turned down. Satellite imagery is one of the least concerning, just because the resolution for satellites is about 35 centimeters, meaning that a soccer ball is 1 pixel, so you can't see people's faces or license plates or anything like that. No personal identifiers. So measuring, and what you see on the screen here is an example of the St. Petersburg port in Russia, aluminum sitting there. How we measure, so for metals, accuracy is extremely important. And RS Metrics has a platform that uses a front end for machine learning, computer vision, AI, and we pull in imagery, and the computer does a first shot at trying to draw a polygon around an iron ore stockpile at a terminal, or aluminum ingots that are sitting outside, or vehicles, cars, trucks, but it's not always perfect. And especially because of the nature of what we're looking at here. These are smelters and locations that have a lot of smog and very, very messy areas. So we really need a human workflow engine, which then takes those pre-counted or pre-measured images and corrects them, and then feeds that back into the system so it can learn from there. Once all that data is clean, it's put on our application engine and delivery for customers. So what we're actually measuring, here's some other examples. These are 2 Chinese copper smelters, and you can see the copper anodes sitting outside that they produce. And what we're measuring is 2-dimensional area. So we're not in square meters. We're not at this point trying to use 3D, which is possible with satellites. You can use stereo collections. But there's no history for that, going back years to compare to, so no baseline. So we're using 2 dimensions, and that really works well. It's true that sometimes there might be a pile that's higher than another pile or lower, but most of what we're measuring is really driven by the area of what's sitting out there. The heights of the piles is not quite as important, and we prove that with our predictions and forecasts. In addition to the finished metal that's sitting out there, we're also measuring inputs. So concentrates that come in bags or piles, and then also vehicles, which all by themselves are extremely predictive. So employee cars, semi-trailer trucks, dump trucks. In 2017, we saw something like 12 zinc smelters starting up because the zinc prices had increased. And at first there was nothing there, then employee cars, then trucks, then concentrates, and then product. So it's months and months and months ahead of when operations are usually announced. We see things starting to ramp up. Just a couple of screenshots from our app. What you see here is using MetalSignals to measure trends at an individual location. So this is the Altamira aluminum smelter in Abu Dhabi. And what you're seeing is since 2014, measurements on the ground at that smelter of what is actually sitting there. So even if this is all MetalSignals did, at this point, this is still shocking to a lot of people who are fundamental analysts and very familiar with the metals industry. You never would get anything like this before. The only other data that's available really are from people doing surveys, phone-based surveys, calling smelters, calling producers and buyers and customers and saying, how are things changing and growing. But what this is a fact-based, image-based measurement that is all in square meters. So it's all comparable to any other smelter in the same country or the same type of metal or all over. So they can be grouped together, compared, put into indexes, which we'll show in a moment here. So just another example of an individual location. This is the St. Petersburg port in Russia. This was interesting last year because the Rusal sanctions, and there were questions if this port was going to be overloaded with aluminum. And it turned out that Rusal managed to reduced their production somewhat. We also looked at the nearby smelters, Bratsk and Cyanogorsk and others, and I guess they're not nearby, but smelters that feed this port, and they also did not overflow with aluminum. And it was a big part of the story. Now the sanctions are over, but it turned out that when we were looking at this port, near a few weeks after the sanctions, there actually was less aluminum there than had been since 2015. So this is the kind of information which, just at a glance, just looking at one location, can completely change a story, because you hear rumors, but then you look at actually what is happening. And when you roll this up and you're looking at 500 or so locations, you're getting the entire story. So in terms of aggregating the data, we looked at that one example for the one smelter, but it gets really powerful when you can aggregate it together. So here we're looking at two examples of rolling up these measurements by country and metal type. So on the left are copper smelters in China and Chile, the two largest producers in the world. And we're showing here over time, the last 2 years, how China in orange has changed in terms of how much copper is sitting at the smelters at the locations in China. And it's dropped off quite a bit, whereas Chile is kind of went up and then down here, although this is a little dated since November. On the right is aluminum. So the orange line is Chinese aluminum sitting at the smelters in China, and the vertical dotted line is when the aluminum tariffs were announced in March. So everyone knew the tariffs were coming, so did the Chinese, and you can see that well ahead of the tariffs, they really increased production, got as much out as they possibly could, and then after anti-dumping came into place, it dropped off again, and for the first time in forever, the U.S. actually had positive year-over-year growth in aluminum smelter storage in the U.S. So just this here is lifting the veil inside of China and seeing what's happening. And I also want to stress that the only other data really related to this, there's surveys, there's also some import and export data that you can get, but that's way after the fact. This measurement is at the location in China right after it's still hot off the presses, not 3 or 4 months later when it's on a shipping container. Just a couple other quick use cases in measuring, also in China, which is of interest these days. The blue bars here are showing, again, RS Metrics Chinese copper smelter inventory sitting at the smelters in China. And we're just showing that it forecasts PMI as well for China. The Kexin PMI missed the expectations in the last 2 months. That's the orange line. The blue line is what was actual. And you can see how it lines up better with what we're measuring in China for copper. We also could group together copper, aluminum, zinc, iron ore, and others in China and probably even improve on this, but just thought it was interesting just at a quick and dirty comparison, even just with copper, that it lines up this well. Historically, this is not a forecast. We're still looking at measuring here, but if you just look and do a best fit line historically through comparing historical prices and inventories to stocks, you can see on the left, aluminum inventory versus what we're measuring for aluminum smelters globally lines up about 80%. And we measure steel that's sitting at ports mostly steel rebar, and that actually lines up with steel rebar front month futures, about 80% as well. And going forward, when we predict, it's also about 80% directionally accurate, which I'll show you. Just again, forecasting using the satellite inventory measurements line right up with exchange inventory measurements. When we group it all together globally, this is again similar to the other chart we showed on El Tawila with the individual orange bars, but in this case, the orange bars are year-over-year change in global copper smelter storage. So this is about 100 or so copper smelters around the world in our sample, which are almost all the big ones. And we're starting back here in 2014, year-over-year. So you can see each month that it's starting to increase back in 2014. Supply is starting to go up, so you expect price to come down, which it does. A little later here, you see supply is dropping again. You expect price to come up, and it does. And the different colors on this price chart, what it's really showing is just significant change. So the simplest way we do that in our app is we just have a fixed six-month historical comparison period, and we take this most current data point, compare it to the prior 6 months, and then just use a half of a standard deviation hurdle up and down, which is what these dotted lines are. And the blue line is the cumulative quarterly average, just sort of smooths out the months a bit. So when the line is above the channel, it's a signal. When it's below the channel, it's a signal. And when it's inside, we call it a no signal, which shows up as yellow. So it's like a traffic light. So red down, green up, red down, green up is kind of the way it works. And what I circled here, this is an example where it's non-fundamental. There was a big investor that liquidated $1 billion copper position. That's something we're not going to pick up with MetalSignals, and it just to really stress the point that, like anything else, this product is meant to be used, in your current process with your existing data and models. It's not something you use all by itself. It's purely focused on inventory. There's nothing in here about consumption or demand. So it's a very clean data set. You're very sure about what is in here and what isn't in here. And the point of our models and our signals really is just to demonstrate the power of the data all by itself. So we have applications for fundamental analysts that can do all these kinds of groupings and alerts and measurements, but mostly focused on quants today. So getting to predictions. So now that we have everything measured and put into our platform, we're able to do some, as I said, demonstration models and forecasts. So there's kind of two main ways that we do this. One is for commodities trading, and that's forecasting the direction of inventory and futures price. And it's about 70 to 90% directionally accurate 1, 2, and 3 months out, depending on the metal type. And then furthermore, there is a very strong link with global metal supply and other investments, so equities, currencies, and interest rates. So we also show a number of ways to forecast those prices and generate alpha. So first, just going to go very quickly here, and a lot of this information is available to you, after the call. We use a KNN, or a nearest neighbors method, to forecast CME copper futures price 1, 2, and 3 months out, and it's about 80% directionally accurate. And what you're seeing here are these three charts. The bars in the chart, that's not MetalSignals, that's purely just the price data from CME, and it's showing the change for 1 month, 2 months, and 3 months. And the only thing that RS Metrics did here is we just colored these bars. So in this chart on the left, we colored the bars 1 month ahead of time, in the middle one, 2 months ahead of time, and on the right, 3 months ahead of time. So this drop in March 2008, we knew that was going to happen 3 months earlier. And this actually only goes through July. We have it through February now, and it's still, nearly about 80, a little higher even in some cases, directionally accurate. So this works for both the futures price and also inventory on the exchanges. And if you think about it in that iceberg analogy, that's what we're doing here is we're measuring at the bottom of the iceberg, and then 3 months later it gets to the top of the iceberg. Another simpler way than KNN is just using a reverse moving average crossover method, which is just a short-term versus a long-term moving average. So this is sort of the quick and dirty way. It's not quite as directionally accurate. It's closer to about 70%, which still is pretty shocking. Again, this is only using this outdoor inventory data from satellite images. So there's a lot of other information that you already have that you can use to further improve this. But when the signals cross, it generates a signal, and the same type of an approach there. Moving right along, so for those of you who are also interested in things besides just forecasting the futures price and inventory, MetalSignals measurements are very predictive of equities, currencies, and interest rates. For example, currencies on CME, we're able to forecast the price for the euro, Australian dollar, the pound, etc. What you see on the screen here is a list of about 100 tickers that we just pulled together as an example. There's probably 300 or 400, 500 equities, currencies, and interest rates that you could really test with this, and works well with this. But just initially did about 100. Some of them are very obvious, and they're names that are related to metals like Alcoa or Glencore. Some of them are not. Maybe Caterpillar, Komatsu are equipment companies. But then some indexes and things that maybe like the euro that you wouldn't think are related. But those same exact signals, with not changing any of the parameters we use, just that same 6-month comparison period and half a standard deviation hurdle, we're not trying to overfit. Just that alone forecasts stock price for Glencore, Freeport, BHP. You can see red down, green up, red down, green up. And so this is just a simple app method of forecasting, but there are a lot of deeper ways to do that. This is actually the euro over the dollar. So this price chart is showing the euro over the dollar and with our signals overlaid. So green up, red down, green up, red down. And we even in our demo models show long only return. So when we have a positive signal, we're all in the position. When we have a yellow or a no signal, we're 50% in the position. And when it's red or a negative signal, it's all cash. So that's why it looks kind of flat here. But holding the euro flat or long since 2014, you'd lose about 12%. And using the signal strategy for long only, I think it's positive about 12%. If you did a long short, it'd be even better because you'd pick up this whole drop here. But what we do, just a couple more minutes, just to really even go further with this with equities and currencies and interest rates, we did an out of sample test for 2018. And so we just set all the parameters and then run it all through 2018. It's kind of a bad year to do this since a lot of these names, tickers lost. So at the bottom, you can see what you would get if you just held these long. But when you do it long and with signals and long short with signals, it far outperforms. And just grouping it together, our long short is -12 versus the -18 benchmark for Morningstar, and far better than holding long. So in summary, RS Metrics, has provided this type of large-scale satellite data and signals to investors and businesses since 2010 in a number of sectors. It's a unique tool for quant strategies for forecasting and trading metal futures price and also equities, currencies, and interest rates, macro, emerging markets, China PMI. There's a lot of different use cases. And then for fundamental analysts, it's really important because it turns the lights on in the room, so you don't bump in the furniture anymore. You can see exactly where you're going, and allows you to see where are the physical flows of inventory at literally individual locations, and then obviously roll that up by metal, country, or location type. So all this information, it's available from CME Data Mine. And up on the screen, I have some links here where you can go and learn from about other alternative data sets and do a trial subscription. We try to make this very easy for testing and give you the full background, full history for testing. Just want to check if Stuart was back on for a minute.
I hopefully am, if you can hear me now, Tom.
Yes, can hear you. I'm just going to flip up to those.
Fantastic. So, yeah, so apologies everybody for the audio issues earlier. Really what we wanted to convey is that from a CME Group perspective, we're extremely excited by the partnership that we have with RS Metrics. One of our hope is that this data, alongside the other alternative data sets we provide, offers greater transparency and greater insight into some of the markets that we operate. In particular, the copper futures market is the one we've been talking about today with RS Metrics. And really, one of the roles that CME Group plays, I guess, Tom, if you could switch to the, not the next slide, but the one after that. So this is alternative data at CME Group. One of the roles that CME Group plays here is trying to curate really high quality data sets for our customers. So we believe as an exchange, we should be finding the data sets and helping our customers to find greater insights into the markets that we operate. As Tom said, all of this content, whether it be the alternative content or the traditional content, is available on our DataMine platform, and that is our cloud-based self-service tool that allows customers to get access to all of our data going back to 1972. And the really powerful thing about it is the fact that through one contract and one API, yes, you can get all of our traditional data, but you can also get all of this alternative content as well, including the RS Metrics data. With the trial, we provide all of the back history for free, alongside a trial agreement, alongside updates for a 30-day period. So we'd encourage you to get in touch and let us know what use cases you would have for this content. But that's it from me. I think I'll hand back over to you, Tom. I realize we're out of time, but we might have time for any questions if there were any on the portal.
Sure. Thanks, Stuart. Yeah, just a couple questions. Someone asked if the slides would be available. Yes, you can contact CME, and these slides are available as part of the test just to help understand the data a little better. And then just let's see a couple questions. Someone asked, how do we know which metal is at each location? That's if we're looking at an aluminum smelter or a copper smelter, obviously we know what's there. If it's silvery metal at aluminum smelter, we know it's aluminum, not zinc. At storage areas like Castleton's Braithwaite, for example, or ports, sometimes it's not so clear. And so in those cases, we've really worked closely with our customers to help understand where each metal is stored, but also how to identify them using imagery. We're not using any kind of spectral analysis. It's really just human beings doing quality control to make sure that what we're looking at is what we think it is. In some cases, we have something called metal generals where we don't know what it is, but almost all of that is steel. I think the last question, just how frequent the images are taken and increase. I think we covered that, but right now it moves on kind of every week or two, and that's going to get to hopefully weekly or daily later on through the end of the year. And then the very last question, are all the MetalSignals data available through Datamine? Currently, the copper data set is available through Datamine. And if you'd like to do, we're going to be putting aluminum and zinc and the other metals on soon, but you just can contact CME first for copper, and then they'll connect you with us to directly test the other metal, which will be up soon on Datamine as well. Images that come with this offering are not typically sent as part of the quant data set, but if that's something that you'd like, that can be delivered on the app as well. So I think that's all the questions we had. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.